afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, friends. Welcome to CBC Studio 700 on this lovely afternoon. Can everyone hear me all right? Is the microphone doing its thing? Thank you. My name is Robert Kerr, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. This afternoon, we have the very good fortune to meet Minister龍應台, the Minister of Culture for Taiwan. We will hear her unofficial observations on civil society, consider opportunities to collaborate with Taiwan in the cultural realm, and engage in lively discussion. Before we go any further, I would like to thank the Ministry of Culture for Taiwan, the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office, Vancouver, and the Asian Canadian Special Events Association for organizing this event here this afternoon, which I think in a way really kicks off this year's 23rd annual Tell Us Taiwan Fest. And the festival gets into high gear tomorrow and runs through Monday at the Vancouver Art Gallery Plaza, all along Granville Street, and at Robson Square. So get out and enjoy it. There's music, film, dance, wonderful food, and some great games and all kinds of things for all ages. It's a great festival, and it's all free, so make sure you check it out. It's truly an honor to introduce today's speaker, an individual with an illustrious career, full of remarkable accomplishments, and someone who shows certainly no chance of slowing down, or no sign of slowing down at this point. She's an internationally renowned essayist, cultural critic, author, and professor of literature.龍應台was born in Taiwan and received her doctorate in English literature from Kansas State University. She has taught at universities in the USA, Europe, and Hong Kong, has been a newspaper columnist in Germany, Taiwan, and China, and has published 30 books. Her provocative op-ed essays, collectively published in 1985 as Yehuji, the Wildfire, are considered to have greatly contributed to the democratization of Taiwan. Her writings are published simultaneously in Taiwan, China, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Singapore, and the USA, and create lively debate throughout the Chinese community globally. Ms. Long's 2009 book, Dajiang Dahai 1949, Big River, Big Sea, Untold Stories of 1949, deals with the human impact of a defining event in Taiwan's modern history, China's Civil War of the late 1940s. It tells the story of the many Chinese families that were broken up by the Civil War that ended in 1949, with some 2 million supporters of Chiang Kai-shek's Kuomintang government escaping mainland China to Taiwan. The book is a bestseller in Taiwan and Hong Kong, and we're encouraged and hopeful that an English translation will be published in the near future.龍應台entered Taiwan's public service in 1999 as the first Minister of Culture for the city of Taipei. During her 4-year term, she designed and implemented a cultural policy that significantly increased the visibility of the arts in the city. The policy centered on a conservation and development project which transformed underutilized or abandoned Taipei heritage buildings into museums, artist villages, and literature houses. This inspired approach to city planning and incorporating cultural aspirations has become a much quoted model in other Chinese urban centers, and I think it's something that our civic planners and civic leaders would certainly take a good look at and perhaps learn some interesting lessons from here in Vancouver and in Canada as well. Together with a group of fellow Taiwanese entrepreneurs and intellectuals, Ms. Long established the nonprofit龍應台Cultural Foundation in 2005. The foundation is committed to fostering a culture of global vision, providing platforms for cultural exchanges and intellectual dialogues, and enlivening a positive civic spirit in Taiwan's young democracy. The foundation presents regular lectures through the popular Taipei Salon series and seminars through a Thinkers Salon.龍應台was appointed Minister of Culture for Taiwan's national government in May of this year. Now, Vancouver has been very fortunate over the past decade to have regular and growing opportunities to experience the rich variety and unique perspective of Taiwanese arts and culture. Through the annual cultural showcases brought to us by Taiwan Fest and Lunar Fest, and through feature performances, exhibitions and films at the Cultural Olympiad, Vancouver 125, the UBC Museum of Anthropology, Music Fest Vancouver, the Vancouver International Children's Festival, the Vancouver Taiwanese Film Festival, and the Vancouver International Film Festival. We have connected with the ideas, expression, and creativity of a remarkable mix of outstanding traditional and contemporary Taiwanese artists. In this respect, our two countries have already shown a great interest in collaboration and laid the groundwork for greater development in this area. While the histories of Taiwan and Canada differ greatly, our two countries share a number of common experiences and attributes. We're home to ancient Aboriginal peoples and resurgent Aboriginal cultures. We've each experienced a significant colonial period. Our countries are both relatively young nation states that have prospered next door to a very large and influential cultural, economic, and military power. And while we experience the influence of our neighbors, we have both developed our own national cultural identities, which are hard to define, but which reflect our distinct values, among them the quest for a civil society. Perhaps all of this is part of the reason why Canada and Taiwan have enjoyed a long history of good cultural, economic, and political relations. And we look forward to that continuing well into the future. Now, following Minister Long's talk today, we invite you to join the conversation with comments and questions from the floor. We'll have lots of time for that, so please stick around and engage in the dialogue. And now, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Minister龍應台.
A real pleasure to be here. I remember that I was here the first time 3 years ago, and that experience left me very, very deep impression. So I'm glad to be back, and especially the Taiwan Festival is going to take place. I started off my trip with New York City, where I talked with people at the Met, at the Guggenheim, and then on to Washington, where I talked with the leading people at the Smithsonian, and I talked with politicians and all that, and the topics were all very serious ones. And when I was sitting down there and look at the topic here, which is printed there, I thought, my God, what a serious topic, I don't want to talk about that. and you can't imagine what beautiful sky and air Vancouver has. So the last night I thought, I'm really okay, because maybe some of you have come, not because of me, but because of the topic. So I really have to, I can't go too far away from the topic, but I decided that I'm just going to have a good time with you this afternoon by sharing with you some of my personal experiences as a Taiwanese, as a prelude to the festival where quite a few Taiwanese artists are going to come and perform and show you what they can and what they love. So is that okay? Something really very unofficial, okay? So it's so impressive that Vancouver has this Taiwan festival, and it actually is a collaboration of the private sector, of some very engaged Canadian Taiwanese citizens, and the local government and the local NGOs. This is very impressive. So I thought that some of you must have seen the performances of the Club Gate Company. Have you? Some of you, all right. And some of you are probably also familiar with the works of some of the Taiwanese filmmakers, such as Bo Xiaoxian or Anne Lee, all right. And some of you might even know that Taiwanese pop music leads the whole market in Greater China. If you ask a mainland person who listens to popular music, is anybody in the audience coming from China, from mainland? Is the background from mainland? Just only one person? Okay. Do you listen to popular music?
Yes.
Who's your favorite?
I think just Jay Chou and Lincoln.
Okay, so I was going to say, if you ask the Chinese, hey, introduce me to some good popular singers, and probably 90% of the chances they will give you a name of a person who comes from Taiwan. So that's the situation, as indeed, Jay Chou comes from Taiwan. And some of you probably are also familiar with the fact that, or you've been told that a lot of works of Chinese writers and public intellectuals are widely read in China or in Greater China. So I am going to give you a glimpse of what is behind all this. You are going to see all the performances of the weekend. I would like to show you from my very unofficial perspective what kind of soil do these blossoms come? So the background. Taiwan was a Japanese colony for 50 years, 1895 to 1945. And 50 years is enough for 2 or 3 generations of people to change their language, to change their writing, and to change their identity. So when you are at the year 1945, there is already that generation of Taiwanese who think that they are Japanese, and nobody had expected that things are going to change. But during the Second World War, especially nearing the end, the island of Taiwan was heavily bombarded by whom? The Americans, of course, because Taiwan was part of Japan, so it was heavily devastated as well. While still struggling with the post-war recession, then came 1949. The islands of, I use the word islands because Taiwan has other islands together forms the idea of Taiwan. So then came 1949, the islands of 6 million Taiwanese who have been fighting actually on the side of Japan, not out of their will, but it's a historically designed. Almost overnight, they received the influx of 2 million Chinese from the mainland, escaping from the brutal civil war. A war which in fact started when? 1927, in fact, was a long, long civil war, only intermittently interrupted by 8 years of the war against the Japanese invasion. So it was a very brutal, long civil war. So these 6 million Taiwanese living on the island, thinking that they are Japanese, and young men of Taiwan had been sent by Japan to Indonesia, to those Southeast islands, to Papua New Guinea to fight and work for the Japanese army, the 6 million Taiwanese. And then overnight, you had an influx of 2 million Chinese who, including my parents, who had endured 8 years of disastrous war against Japan, and plus 4 years of bloody civil war with the communists. So 6 million plus 2 million. So who are the Taiwanese then? They are these 8 million people who, during World War II, have been pitched against each other. And after World War II, were trying to cope with economic devastation, total displacement, and poverty. That was 1949. So then we enter the 1950s. Totally defeated by the communists, the nationalist government led by Chiang Kai-shek, who now ruled Taiwan, felt that they had to secure Taiwan against communist infiltration as well as possible physical takeover. So what do you do to secure your islands? You declare martial law. All right. So the martial law was declared in May 1950. And what does martial law mean? It means, as I spoke before, and I wrote about it a lot, it means that the 1,200 kilometer long coastlines were military zones. So for children growing up in normal circumstances, when you tell people that you grow up in a fishing village, as I did, then people would immediately ask, well, you must be a good swimmer. Or say, oh, the beach has coconut trees and the breezes and the boats and all that. No, for us, the coastlines were military zones, and of course we did not swim. Because when you go onto the beach, then you see soldiers with rifles, with bayonets, and you also have the fear that dangerous enemies would crawl up from out of the ocean and they will kill you. So that's the way you grow up. So, and in the 50s, especially in the year I was born, 1952, was the year where most highest number of people were executed in 1952. Thousands and thousands of students, intellectuals, and just about anybody who was suspected of espionage or for just reading the wrong book, they could get executed. Freedom of expression was, of course, denied, and before 1982, as late as 1982, no Taiwanese were allowed to apply for a passport because you didn't have the right to exit the country. So, if you know the Cloud Gate, if you know Lin Huaiming, and all the others of this generation, this is the background that we grew up in. And you compare this background with what he produces today. That's what I'm trying to do today, right? So, after you learn that this is the background, the larger scene that we grew up in, then naturally you might ask, oh my God, how did you guys grow up, you know? Well, as children, I'm going to tell you how we grew up. As children, we all learned to write calligraphy. Every morning on our way to school, we carried this little satchel of ours, and in that, other than the books and the handkerchief, we would have brushes and inkstone. Okay, if you are my age or even younger, then you share the same experience and same memory with me. And we would walk into school, and on campus we would pass by Confucius statue, and walk into the classroom and we sit down, and you will put a little water in that inkstone and you grind it, and you take out your brushes and you start to write calligraphy. That's the way we learn writing. And we also memorized poetry from the Tang and Song dynasty, which was about 600 AD and 1000 AD, the best time, the golden time for poetry. So we memorized the poetry from the Tang and Song dynasty, and we learned the Analects from Confucius by heart. So much so that when we greet a friend who comes from far away to visit us, we would say, wow, having friends come from far away, what a pleasure that is, quoting from Confucius. And it really is funny because is that very profound? Why do you have to quote Confucius to express simply a hi, nice to see you, but you quote Confucius. So much so that our Chinese friends, our Chinese colleagues, who 60 years later were allowed to meet with us. And I heard these Chinese colleagues would say, oh my God, hearing you Taiwanese people talking to each other feels like reading a chapter in some classic book, you know. So that's because the upbringing is so different. And when we became teenagers, quickly became teenagers and became college students in the early 1970s, our reading list was extended. So who were on the reading list? Now, how many of you come from Taiwan, grew up in Taiwan? All right, now let's share this list, but it depends on the age as well. Okay, let's see. Well, on my list, and I think on the list of my generation, Josephine is smiling, she probably reads the same list as I do. We read Alexander Dumas, we read Zola, we read, my God, Dostoevsky. I mean, when we were teenagers, you know? And we read Tolstoy, War and Peace, Anna Karenina, and now looking back, I was thinking, oh my God, do you know what you were reading? I mean, Anna Karenina, can you even remember the names of these people? But that's what we did, very serious use. I remember books like Mount Crystal. I remember reading A Tale of Two Cities. Of course, that was must read for every teenager. And we read poetry of the Indian poet Tagore and the American Walt Whitman. We even read novels of Hermann Hesse. And years later, in 1980, I moved to Europe in 1986. And I talked with many German and Swiss friends, and especially Swiss, because Hermann Hesse lived there. So I would say, oh yes, I read Hermann Hesse when I was 15. And they would say, Hermann Hesse, who is he? I mean, the Germans don't read him. And of course, we also read Mishima Yukio. You know who that is? 三岛由纪夫. Okay, a very extreme radical writer who committed suicide. And of course, Farewell to Arms by Hemingway. So give me some names that you remember, authors or books, when you were a college student. Oh yes, Woman in the Line, yeah, of course. Anything else?
Of course.
Oh yes. Okay, well you're more advanced, I do not. And you might be surprised if we go on further with the reading list of the late 60s and early 70s. Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, that's an amazing thing. And Kierkegaard, who knows who Kierkegaard is, you know? And Sartre, of course. So in the early 70s, I remember on campus, on the university campus, when the guy tries to get the attention of a girl, you have to carry a hardback book under your arm, revealing the title of that book, and what kind of book that should be. And there's one that really stuck out in my memory. Can you imagine what kind of book, what book that is I'm thinking of? When the guy wants to impress a girl that I'm a thinker. So what kind of book would you carry? I remember this one. So sprach Zarathustra. You know what that is in English or in Chinese? It's by Nietzsche. So speaks Zarathustra. I don't know how to pronounce it in English. Zarathustra. Zarathustra. Yes. Is that correct? Okay. So sprach Zarathustra. That's a translation from Nietzsche, and it's a Superman philosophy. And can you imagine the 18-year-old from Taiwan under martial law, that if you would read Capital from Marx, you get sent into jail and you get executed? And you will carry a book by Nietzsche which says, So sprach Zarathustra. In Chinese, of course, or even better, the complete work of Schopenhauer. It's an amazing time. So quite crazy. To this day, I am mystified by the way knowledge transmits, you know, in very surprising ways. What did we listen to? What kind of songs did we listen to at that time? Nowadays we listen to J. Chow, but we did not at that time. As school children, first grader, second grader, you know, what kind of songs we were taught in school? We sang Lorelei by Heinrich Heine, and we sang the Lieder, the art songs from Franz Schubert. For example, there was a very famous song which later on when I lived in Germany, I realized that song, the original of the song from Schubert, is entitled Der Lindenbaum, the linden tree. My Taiwanese friends here, do you know which song this is? You know this song. Der Lindenbaum, from Schubert, the linden tree. What is it trying to say? Yes. It's the translation of it is a totally different tree. It's a Buddhist tree, but it's the Lindenbaum. So we actually were taught German art songs and not much of our own songs. And then what we thought they were Chinese songs, years later I discovered they are not Chinese songs, they are German songs too. For example, what's that? I need to Canadian sing this song. We sing it as can somebody sing this song? Wait, once more. How does it go? 一起起走高，来匆匆去匆匆，走走去It's a children's nursery song. And then later on, when I was in Germany, I realized it's translated from German. In German, it goes Händchen klein, da la 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 la, and then when we were small, we also sang as a nursery something like 两只老虎，跑得快，跑得快。Wow, but actually it's French and English and German. Okay, good. So, and as students of the 70s, we listened only to Western music, only. Classic music, symphony music, and all that was for those who pretended to be high-minded, and soft rock for those who pretended to be very ill. And you would hear Beethoven's Fifth Symphony was bang, 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 coming out of a very crummy dormitory room. And at that time, then Western dances were forbidden. So, and the youngsters, the college students would try to hold dance parties in private homes. Like there's a small, whoever has a big home, then we have dance parties inside a darkened room, because the police would raid you and arrest you when you have a dance party. But in those closed-in, I had a friend during a dance party, and somebody shouted that the police were coming. And so everybody was running all directions, and we were on the 6th floor. And this student, this friend of ours, he jumped out the window and broke his leg. He became a physicist later. Okay, well, what I'm trying to say is, and then so when you dance to the Beatles and the Bee Gees and the Peter, Paul and Mary and Judy Collins. So that's the way we grew up, you know. And in that time and age, that we did not listen to anything that was written in the Chinese language. And if you did, then you were looked down upon as somebody who really has no taste and backwards and really contemptible. So that was the time. And what kind of movies did we watch? Remember movies, in the early 70s, late 60s, what we watched, what kind of movies?
The Sound of Music.
Yes, The Sound of Music, indeed. And when we were children, you probably my age, when we were children, you remember a time when we were allowed to watch Japanese film? And then it disappeared overnight because it was banned. At that time we didn't know what banned meant, but it was banned and all of a sudden it disappeared. You can call American film. So we watched American films, Gone with the Wind, remember? What else? Roman Holidays, even Ben-Hur. Huh? You remember what? Other movies come to mind?
3 years old.
What's that? Oh, that's the Japanese time, which was banned later. American films. and all kinds of American films, and including even spaghetti western, like I Know. Remember? Okay. So even US films about Second World War we watched, through which we got our first impression of the Germans, especially the German soldiers who were wearing these helmets. And we got an impression all German soldiers were dummies. You just knock at their head and they fall like bowling balls. So, American, you grew up with American films. And I spent 2 years in Switzerland and following that 11 years in Germany, where I raised my 2 sons. And I remember when my older son, Andreas, when he came home from his school as a first grader, he just entered primary school, was very proudly came back with they had backpack and very colorful satchels. He's German school kid. He came back one day with his colorful satchel and proudly showed me the new books he got from school, among which is a big map of geography. I thought, we were opening up everything together, we were sharing, and I thought this could probably be a map, a world map, or a map of Germany. And then we opened up. No, it was not at all. It was not even a map of our province, which is called Hessen, where Frankfurt is. It's a map of our tiny village, and the village has only inhabitants about 18,000 inhabitants, and here is a huge map about this village. So we open up the map on the floor, and the mother and son crouched together, and with our fingers we followed every and each little stream and trail in and around the village, spelling out the names of each and every hill and valley, every forest and pond on that particular map. I was very impressed. Why? We Taiwanese, as children, never learned about our own villages. I had never even seen a map of our village. We studied only the map of China. We were able to fill in the names of each and every province of China, and we could recite the lengths of the Yangtze River and the height of the Great Wall, but we did not know our own villages. Okay, coming back to the larger picture again. In 1971, Taiwan lost its seat in the UN. It used to, it's China. Republic China was China until 1971. In 1971, Taiwan lost a seat, so was excluded from the UN, which was a shock to people, but then people thought we still had the big brother, the United States support, so it was still okay. But when the United States recognized China and broke up diplomatic relations with Taiwan in 1978, the shock was very deep. The Taiwanese felt the island was sinking. The earth underneath the feet was taken away in 1978. But when this crisis of that dimension occurred, then the process of soul searching began. Fundamental questions were being asked after 1978 into the 1980s, early 80s. So if we are not recognized as China, because your seat was taken away, your label was taken away, your brand name was taken away. So if we are not recognized as China and not accepted by the world community as Chinese, then what are we? And what do we stand on? And who are we? So these were the fundamental questions which began to be really probed on after 1978. And following this train of thought, other questions naturally would follow. What are our songs? what is our dance? Where is our literature and what should we write about? Whom should we care for? What is our movie? To what should we dedicate our passion? All this avalanche into the mind of the Taiwanese, late 70s, early 80s, all the way to today. After 1978, students organized homegrown Peace Corps. They left the cities and went deep into the fishing villages, to farming communities, and into the mountains to Aboriginal tribes to do volunteer work. Many writers began to depict realities in the surroundings around them. Artists began to search for their own ways of expression, and that includes my good old friend, Lin Huai. With a deep sense of crisis and feeling deserted by the world community, totally unsure about the future, the Taiwanese began this process of searching. And as you must know, soul searching in a time of crisis always brings one thing, which is called solidarity. When a small boat is hit by storm from all sides, you huddle together. Okay? So in this process, a kind of a new identity was being formed throughout the 80s, throughout the 90s, and still going on today. This is the way I would explain to you why the Taiwanese that you have met seem to be so passionately committed to their home, to the fate of Taiwan. Because behind all that, there is a sense of crisis, of insecurity, of being deserted, excluded from the global community. And that the crisis ushered in the era of cultural awakening, I would call. The Cloud Gate, the youth theater, the Sing Our Own Song movement, the native literature movement, and many other social movements were all very active forces in the 80s, which define what Taiwan is today. And today, Taiwan enjoys the position as the cultural powerhouse, although a modest one, but it is considered a cultural powerhouse of the Chinese-speaking world. As a matter of fact, what underlies all this is, I think, in Taiwan, two worlds meet. The world of classical Chinese traditions, illustrated by the fact that we grew up with brush writing, with calligraphy, with the analects and all that, and the world of, perhaps I would call it modernity, influenced by the whole set of ideas in the Western world. In other words, if you look at the Cloud Gate performances, you will see exactly these two sets of aesthetics merge there. The aesthetics of the classical Chinese world, and the aesthetics coming from the open society of the West mingled in there.
In the audience, would love to ask you some questions or comments, or discuss ideas that you may have in terms of this exchange and collaboration of cultures between Canada and Taiwan. And certainly one of the interesting ideas that I've had of Taiwan, and that I think was even further kind of confirmed by your talk today, is what a crossroads, cultural crossroads and economic cultural crossroads Taiwan is, how it represents, and it's really in a very pivotal position between the West and the East. And understanding again sort of the cultural context, the historical context, in further the importance is very fascinating. So I would like to throw it open to the floor.
I'm Charles Yang, and allow me to just sit here and talk to you because I have trouble staying up and talk for medical conditions. But you've been a long, distinguished essayist and cultural critics. And now that you assumed the office of the cultural minister, I just would like to ask you, what is your views on Taiwanese culture in the past as you opposed to now you are in an official position? Can you comment on that?
I'm kind of having been summoned to do. If I had any contribution to the culture, Chinese culture at all, or Taiwanese culture, as a writer, I was only responsible to myself. I wrote because I love to write. I don't write for others. I write for myself. And when I write, when my writing reaches excellence, then it's effective. Then it moves people. It changes people. But I don't write in order to change people. I don't write in order to please people. I don't care about my readers when I write. I only care whether this is an excellent piece of writing, and when it is excellent, then it naturally moves people, touches the heart. Okay. But now, as a civil servant, unfortunately, I have to work differently. I have to serve the people. I'm a civil, my God, really servant. I feel like one as well. I have to ask the painters a quarter and ask, should we do this, should we do that? I have to take care of the public TV controversy. I have to solve problems. I have to negotiate with my budget office and say, we need more money for culture, and she would say, but we don't have enough money for hospital beds, so what are you talking about? And I have to fight, and I have to stand in the parliament receiving very harsh questions from the parliamentarians, all that. So I am trying to do something for my country in a different capacity, and this is a much more difficult capacity. I'm paid only, as I said, I said many times, my pay is only 1/4 of what I used to earn as a writer, and my working hours is 4 times longer than when I was a writer. I used to criticize others, and people are afraid of me, and now I'm criticized all over by anybody, and I can't even talk back, so that's my job now.
Norman Armour with the Bush Festival. As the first minister of a brand new ministry, what do you see carry through on what you just spoke about? What do you see as the greatest opportunities and perhaps the greatest challenges in starting completely from scratch?
This is not starting from scratch because we are actually piecing together 4 existing ministries into one. So 13 years ago, in 1999, when I stepped into the Taipei city government, I was starting from scratch. There was, the whole island in Taiwan, there was no cultural bureau in any city government. So I started from zero. I was the director of the cultural bureau, and I was sweeping the floor myself because there was not even an office for me. So that was scratching from scratch. And now I'm kind of piecing 4 existing ministries together, and I discovered that this is tougher than starting from scratch. Because when you start something from ground zero, then you really mold it the way you want it to be. And now we have a phrase of describing what I'm doing now. It's like you have an old, totally unfit dress tightly on you, and yet you have to change it by wearing it. You can't even take it off. And that's tough. That really is tough. So the challenges are, for instance, part of the ministry, they were dealing only with film, public music, and TV content. And the other part of the ministry was responsible for literature and publishing, for instance. And these 2 old ministries, they never met before. And now they're together, finally. So the challenges would be well, isn't it possible for the film industry to somehow hook up with literary people, so that literary works could be turned into movies, or with the popular songwriters, if you get together with poets more, then you get nourishment from the poetry, and the poetry gets more read by people who only listen to songs. So it's kind of you finally have you can coordinate different sectors, segregated sectors. So that's the big opportunity. And then of course the challenges we have. One of the big challenges is how do we deal with China? Because over intellectual property, it's a huge issue. For instance, my own book on 1949 that Mr. Kerr has referred to, it was published 3 years ago, and it's banned in China, but everybody has read it. And so I'm happy about it, because the only loss is money, But everybody read it. There are pirated copies all over China. So outside China, we have only Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Malaysia. This particular book was sold something like 500,000 copies. So you could imagine that inside China, if this book were normally published, it would be about 10 times or 20 times the number. So, but this is kind of an intellectual property. We have to really sit down at the negotiation table to tackle with it. And then with the creative industry, China is advancing very quickly, especially in terms of film industry. In May, a Chinese conglomerate just bought the U.S. chain of one of the largest cinema chain called AMC in May. This kind of business takeover worries a lot of people, and it's coming to us as well. So in Taiwan, it's so tiny. So how do we benefit from the prosperity of China and collaborate with them more, at the same time that you still protect your own key industries? So that's a huge challenge. Huge.
By promoting Taiwanese culture festival. You have been one of them, one of the best. That being said, I would like to borrow your questions or your own comment. You mentioned your big book, most current one, 1949, The Big River, Big Sea. That book has been banned in China. And you feel China will treat you, will help you along in negotiating with China, or play against you, because that book you have written and the book has been banned in China. Okay. Second question, that's something related to the films, the movies. Okay. I understand that China, probably, I don't know if you signed the agreement or someone will sign on behalf of the Republic of China. Okay. That allowed, I think that agreement allowed China to import to Taiwan 10 movies. The quota, 10 movies each year, right? And that agreement also said probably there's no limitation in terms of the number of movies that can import to send it to China. In the Taiwan movie. Right. But so far, I think the Taiwan movie really doesn't send so many movies to China. Okay.
I don't know why.
I don't know why. And the impact, is it positive or negative in terms of the Taiwan movies industry or the employees?
First question, the fact that I'm a writer of banned books, whether that has an effect on my capacity now to negotiate, I don't know. because national politics is something so crucial, is of such a large scale. I would think that it should not affect the negotiations. At the same time, when a book gets banned, usually I take it as a medal earned. It's kind of receiving a prize. So it doesn't bother me, and I don't think it should play a part in diplomatic business. And the second question, yes, through our formal negotiation from 2 years or a year ago, we agreed on the quota, which stands still today, but it's going to change soon. That is 10 films, Chinese films are allowed to import into Taiwan every year. And the Chinese part was very generous. They said, we don't set any quota on Taiwanese film going to China. But as it turned out that last year we had only 8 films going in. And you ask why? It's because there's censorship there.
What kind of censorship?
What kind of censorship? Any movie, not only from outside China, but inside China, any filmmaker who wants to produce a film, you have to first get permission from the authority. But don't get me wrong, I am not saying that there were only 8 films because China censored Taiwanese films. No. A lot of reasons could very well be self-censorship, because if I'm a movie director and I produce this film about homosexuality, gay rights, violence, I don't even bother to submit to apply. Well, I just don't do it. You know, there's no point. So you can't really point a finger at them saying that because of censorship, you can't say that either. Yeah. So, but we're trying to improve on this. We are talking to each other. Okay.
My name is Winnie Chen. Very glad to see you here again. As I was listening to you, a lot of things resonate with me. We are growing up in the same time, but I was in a parallel world to yours. Growing up in Hong Kong, there's a lot of similarity, but differences as well. In the 70s, when we were in the universities, a lot of young people, if they wanted to make a connection to the Chinese roots, they would have to read outside of the school, whether it's in the university or school. So many of us who were more interested in literature and in literature in Chinese, we will be reading very, very avidly work by Taiwanese scholars and students who are overseas, opening windows and doors to the outside world. Now, this is not to say that we didn't have Western influences. In fact, we have had a heavier dosage of Western influence in our growing up, but it was more British than world literature. So I was wondering, while we were in Hong Kong receiving influences from Taiwan, I just wonder whether there's any exchange at all. Now, Hong Kong, when we were growing up, we ourselves admitted, we call it the cultural desert of Hong Kong. So that's why we had to look elsewhere for nourishment. So in Taiwan, did people feel some influence from Hong Kong at all? Taiwan.
Okay, I actually don't buy the saying that Hong Kong is a cultural desert. It really depends on how you define culture. And you were right. I moved to Hong Kong in 2003, and I lived there for 9 years. So I just left Hong Kong in February, going back to Taiwan. During those 9 years, I came to realize, wow, Taiwan has played the role of a cultural supplier more than I thought. Because I talked to Hong Kongers, people like you, Hong Kongers like you, they would tell me that when they were college students, they read the novels by Taiwanese writers like Wang Chunming, and they were listening to songs from Taiwan. And they were so familiar with Taiwanese literature. I was very surprised. I didn't know that before. And then further on, I realized that I would come across people growing up in Singapore and Malaysia who would tell me that when they were teenagers, they would listen to the Taiwanese broadcast and listen to the literary drama from Taiwan. So that is because China was locked in from 1949 all the way through the Cultural Revolution and all these disastrous political upheavals. And therefore, you have all the Chinese emigrants who left China, who landed in Indonesia, in Thailand, in Singapore, Malaysia, and Hong Kong. Where do they turn to for culture? Then Taiwan was the place. Especially the KMT, the nationalists, the 2 million people I mentioned. Those 2 million who managed to leave China and landed in Taiwan in 1949, they were a high percentage of these 2 million were the educated class. So you had poets, intellectuals, you had writers, you had artists, a huge percentage in these 2 million. And they stayed there and they became the ruling class because Chiang Kai-shek. And Chiang Kai-shek, with all his brutalities, he was a cultural conservativist, where he thinks that everybody must write the calligraphy, everybody must read the Analects and so on. So as a result, because China locked itself up, and Taiwan became the source of literature, of inspiration for the rest of China, whatever is on the fringe of China, interestingly. And that's what I found when I was in Hong Kong. So, well, you said, you know this book and you know this writer, oh, we read the same thing. So that's the resonance right there. So there's a very interesting, there is one book that has not been written so far. There's one book, that is the contemporary cultural history. The lineage of where the cultural influence, where it got stopped, and then where it curves around and continues, or where it hits a mountain and therefore the river goes underneath, and then it surprisingly in a different place comes up again. Nobody has written this book. And reciprocally, the Hong Kongers always think that they get their cultural nourishment from Taiwan, but it goes the other way too. Taiwan, that's funny. Martial law was declared May 20th, 1950, which means, as I said, the Taiwanese were blocked in. So, my parents got a letter in the 60s from Hong Kong. So Hong Kong for us was a vague place full of danger. Nowadays, you think of Hong Kong, you think of those gangsters shooting on the street, you know. But when I was younger, Hong Kong in our minds, that's a place where communist espionage, you get killed in the parliament and not knowing why. It's a place of danger, of communist infiltration. So my parents got a letter through Hong Kong, from China through Hong Kong, and I heard my parents crying in the back room all night. And the next morning they would show me the letter. That letter was written by their #1 son, who was, as a 2-year-old child, was left behind in China with his grandmother. Because in that time of disorder, you would not take your baby along. You think that's too dangerous for the baby. So they left the child, the only son, with the grandmother, thinking that this war would finish in half a year, in 5 months, and they would come back to pick up the son. They did not know this war that lasted 60 years. Okay, so they saw the son as long dead because there's no communication. Anyway, they showed me the letter, and in this letter, my brother was 16 years old at that time. So a teenager, he was writing that, well, he lived in a village in a very back mountain countryside in the mountains, and he said he could manage to somehow trek the 1,000 kilometers south to Guangzhou. And if my parents would manage to somehow send someone to meet him in Guangzhou, then he would manage to escape. That's during the Cultural Revolution. And my parents cried like hell, and then they burned the letter, and they never wrote back, because there were no way that they could do anything for him. And then if it's discovered that they received letter from Hong Kong, through Hong Kong from China, that could bring upon you a death penalty. So that was the time that we went through. So that was it. And because Taiwan was walled in like this, I remember again as students, in a room like this, small room, and there were windows, we would use a thick blanket and cover up all the windows so that no light would reveal itself. Nobody would see from outside. And inside we would listen to a violin concerto composed by mainland Chinese composer, which was brought in through Hong Kong. That's the Yellow River and the Liangshan Zhu Yintai. So that was in the early 70s. We covered up the whole room, because if we were found out, I don't know what would happen. In 1972, I was a sophomore student at National Cheng Kung University in Tainan. All of a sudden we heard a whisper that somebody is missing, friends are missing. As it turned out, a couple of students, people we knew, students were organizing a book club. They wanted to read Marxism because they felt, well, you told me that's dangerous, but what is it? We want to know. This group of students, as late as 1972, they were sentenced to, some of them were sentenced to death, they got death sentence, or 25 years in jail, imprisonment, or 20 years, from 20 to life imprisonment to death penalty. And finally, on the last appeal, there was no death penalty passed, but it was life imprisonment. And because, of course, they were all released before 1987, when Taiwan became a democracy. So this is the time that Lin Huaiying and we all went through. So I was going to say that when we were students, Hong Kong was the window. In 1967, there was a riot in Hong Kong, breaking up from the leftists, because Hong Kong was influenced by the Cultural Revolution. So the leftists were throwing bombs in Hong Kong, 1967, and the Taiwanese youth, they were secretly importing these reports, these newspaper reports and journals reporting on these riots. So they were circulating underground, under great danger. So when Taiwan was a kind of a cultural source for Hong Kong, and Hong Kong before 1987 was the small window on the outside world for the Taiwanese. There was a very well-known, respected philosopher, professor of Taiwan University, Ying Hai. Because of what he wrote, so he was kind of persecuted by the ruling party, and he would secretly write to his students who were teaching in Hong Kong to secretly send him books to him so that he would know what's going on outside. So Hong Kong was a window, very important window.
Fascinating. I think we're just about out of time, unfortunately. I know there's lots more questions here. I just have one question I'd like to ask you, Minister, before we wrap up. And it's maybe a little bit of a different tack, but I'm wondering if you have any plans or any interest in speaking to the Canadian Minister of Culture, Minister James Moore, and if so, what you might like to discuss with him.
This time we did not make this schedule, but maybe the next time. And For instance, before I came, I was already asking my staff to collect information. For one thing, I was very interested in finding out how the Canadians organize their volunteers. I was told that the volunteers are very well organized, they're very effective in doing a lot of work, and that's what I really like to find out. And then I would love to establish more collaborations with the art museums here and with the festivals here. And I would love to get connected with the Vancouver Writers Festival, for example. So if we had a chance to meet next time, then I definitely have a lot to talk about.
Excellent.
I found Canada such an open-minded and with a relaxed attitude, which is the best environment for culture to grow.
Great. Okay, I know there are many more questions out there, but unfortunately, I do believe we're out of time. So once again, Mr. Orman, thank you so much for participating.